Hello there, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast. I do hope you're not as wet as I am after it's been raining every single day in 2026 so far. I'm Julian in Bristol.
I'm Chris in London.
And I'm Tetiana in London.
So there is an anniversary coming up, and unfortunately, it's not one of the publications that we've been doing so far. It's the fourth anniversary of the war in Ukraine. And we decided to bring on Tetiana, who writes for Kent Surrey, has done a lot of marvelous articles about various subjects, as you are Ukrainian.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Which part of Ukraine are you from again?
I'm from Dnipro.
Oh, the Dnipro.
It's southeastern Ukraine.
We thought we'd do this episode to talk about where we are right now, because it keeps going in and out of the news. Basically, every single time the President of the United States remembers, oh yeah, I meant to be stopping that, after previously committing to ending it after 24 hours. So, Tetiana, I'm sure I can give a reasonable explanation about where we are, but considering the fact that this is a lot more personal to you than it is to me, can you explain where we are in terms of peace?
Well, the peace is not close, and it's highly unlikely it will be achieved anytime soon. And the answer is obvious. Russia wants to destroy Ukraine. It wants Ukraine to disappear as an independent, sovereign state and deprive the people of Ukraine of any chance to develop their country into a strong, democratic, economically prosperous state. It can achieve this objective by the complete occupation of Ukraine, or it can impose the terms on Ukraine, which essentially turn Ukraine into a colony of Russia, and the acceptance of which can facilitate the eventual occupation. So the terms that Russia presented to Ukraine after the start of the full-scale invasion, and Ukraine and Russia held negotiations in Istanbul. These terms were banning Ukraine from seeking NATO membership, the territorial concessions, shortening its military forces, and the status of Russian language as a state language. So after 4 years, Russia controls just 20% of Ukraine's territory, and it struggles to occupy the Donetsk regions. And it attempts to fulfill these objectives by bombings, by terrorists, missile attacks, attacking the infrastructure during the freezing winter, especially now, and making Ukrainians struggling to survive without lighting, electricity, heating, and water, and also with the disinformation and propaganda. The destruction of Ukraine will also fulfill Russia's second objective, which is the destruction of all Europe as a strong and democratic region. Because the consequences of the defeat of Ukraine will reflect on Europe too. And these consequences can be either a direct war between all of Europe and Russia, or the creation of chaos and internal conflicts within Europe. So Russia keeps these objectives, and the main and only result of these negotiations has been the prisoner exchange and the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians from the Russian captivity. So it's really important to not to forget that there are many Ukrainian soldiers and civilians in Russian captivity who are getting tortured and suffering there, and they have families in Ukraine who are waiting for them. So it's important for Ukraine to do everything to get them released. But in terms of peace, it's not close because Russia keeps determined to achieve its objectives.
And it does seem like there's been quite a few sort of instances of peace talks. So like I think there was some that concluded today in Geneva without any sort of agreement on anything. And sort of reading on what happened there, it seems to be that, you know, Russia still demands quite a lot of unreasonable things. And obviously Ukraine rightly doesn't want to, cede any land that has been taken through violence. And From what I was reading, also security guarantees are quite an important part of that discussion as well. And that's sort of, I think, where we're at the moment. Like Jules mentioned earlier, we had Trump saying, "Oh, I'll end the war in 24 hours," but obviously Ukraine wants security guarantees from Europe and the US, and that's a big no-no for Russia because they don't want troops from Europe or the US in their backyard. So where do you see that kind of conversation going in the next couple of months? Is that something that you could see changing at all, or not really?
Well, not really, because as one Ukrainian journalist who I listen a lot said that the security guarantees really they're non-existent because, as he said, that if US and Europe wanted to fight for Ukraine and actually send their troops and go to war with Russia to protect Ukraine, they would have done so even in 2022. So the fact that US and Europe are not already fighting in Ukraine shows that there is a little fear from US and from Europe to go to war with Russia. So the first thing for US and Europe is to realize that they need to increase their defense spending first. They need to strengthen their defense. And even if they are not ready to go to war with Russia to protect Ukraine, the first thing is to apply as much pressure on Russia as possible to make them stop the killing of Ukrainians and make them stop bombing Ukrainians and to stop any advances on Ukrainian territories. This should be first priority right now to apply as much pressure on Russia to make it possible that maybe Ukraine and Russia can agree to some sort of ceasefire first. I think this is the first priority, establishing the ceasefire and stopping the bombings. And in terms of giving Ukraine security guarantees and whether Europe is prepared to fight for Ukraine. Well, this, I think, the discussions which can be hard for Europe as well, because not many Europeans would be ready to support European troops in Ukraine. And as well as the question, of course, is as I said, whether the defense are strong enough for Europe to send to Ukraine, as well as they need the defense forces to stay in Europe countries themselves.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, it's probably, maybe we're going back a bit now, but you mentioned sort of the importance of having pressure put on Russia to one, bring them to the negotiating table in a meaningful way, but also to press for a ceasefire. And I mean, it does strike me a lot how people have forgotten how Crimea was annexed in, was it 2014? Like, that's not, like, people seem to forget that there was a full-scale invasion in 2022, but people seem to forget that Russia annexed a significant chunk of Ukraine over 10 years ago now. From what I've read and from what I understand, the response from the West, so Europe and America, and to that was not strong enough, because obviously if it was, they would have deterred 2022 from happening at all. I mean,
if it was strong enough, it would have deterred the unmarked men invading the Donbass region.
Yeah. So, I mean, where do you think maybe Europe and the West and America kind of have gone wrong after Crimea? Do you think there wasn't a strong enough response? What more do you think could have been done back then to potentially maybe change where we are now?
I was still a child when this was happening, so I wasn't really interested in that. But you see, the current president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, he was elected on promises that he will end the war with Russia. And it didn't happen. So I think the mistake that many European countries and maybe Ukrainians themselves made was the belief that they can probably negotiate some sort of peace with Russia, and that they can talk to Russia and they can try to persuade it to not to go to war, and we can just use diplomacy to deter any war. And yeah, in the end it failed. So maybe I think this was one of the biggest mistakes that both Ukraine and Europe made.
From sort of that answer, and I think it's something to seriously think about. From your perspective, there is no way of resolving sort of a conflict with Russia in terms of diplomacy. So, do you think that when Putin and the rest of the Russian administration only respond to sort of acts of force or like show rather than negotiation and diplomacy? Because I mean, as of now, we haven't seen any. Like we talked about it just before, how many peace talks there have been over the last couple of months alone, and nothing seems to have changed. So, do you think that those efforts are sort of almost not futile, but like, is that the wrong path? Are people looking in the wrong direction if they're looking to try and end things?
Well, I think the main person who started this negotiation was Donald Trump. We see that there were no any negotiations before Donald Trump was elected. And he was the one who was also elected on the promise that he will end the war and he will try to negotiate. So you see, on one hand, there is some sort of feelings that they need to, that from both Ukraine and Russia, that they need to negotiate because they need to show Donald Trump that there is some attempts to find peaceful solutions. And Ukraine needs Donald Trump's support. So obviously they have to go to this negotiating tables to show Donald Trump that, and Russia wants Donald Trump to be on their side too. So they also go to this negotiating table. So yes, but we see that they do not achieve any peace and they do not show any results apart from, I just said, the part of prisoner exchange. And I think that the sentiment to try to please Donald Trump, to demonstrate, to not to lose US support, to try to bring Donald Trump, that both Ukraine and Russia try to bring Donald Trump on their side. So they just negotiate, to please Donald Trump.
So Donald Trump has flip-flopped a lot over the last year and a bit since he got elected. Putin says he wants to end the war, so I trust him. Oh, it turns out he was lying. And then gives some support to Zelensky and Ukraine, and then almost immediately turns around and goes, oh, Putin wants to make peace again. And it seems to be keep doing that back and forth. And the only consistent messaging we've gotten of support, at least vocally, at like news conferences and stuff, has been from Europe. Is there a feeling in Ukraine that you can continue to ensure your defense and independence with just Europe's help? Or is it very much a feeling of, no, we need Europe and the United States?
I think there is a lot of anger towards that and disappointment in the US and ally, because in fact there was some hope from Ukrainians that Donald Trump will end the war, but they didn't realize that he will try to end it by trying to force Ukraine into capitulation. And there is the feeling that Donald Trump is trying to force Ukraine into capitulation, just accept Russia's terms, so he could just so he could get Nobel Peace Prize, and US and Russia can reestablish trade relations and start doing business with each other. So yeah, I think Ukrainians are really but on the other hand, they've also got disappointed in European allies, that European allies, there is feelings that European allies have not been doing enough to support them. So I think Ukrainians realize that as the war continues, they will have to just continue trying to defend themselves with what they have, well, because there is nothing they can do because Donald Trump was democratically elected as the president of US. They can't change that. And so they just have to continue defending themselves with what they have.
Russia currently occupies, like you said, 20% of Ukraine's landmass, which, if there was an equivalent in the UK, listeners, and I can't believe I get to use like an old news classic phrase, but that is literally the size of Wales. Like, if there was an invading army and they occupied Wales, that would be 20% of the UK's landmass right there.
That I've not heard that statistic before, and that does kind of blow my mind, you know. And when it really does make you think what America's sort of, you know, motivations are in the way that they've handled the issue with Russia and Ukraine since Trump came in. You know, we had this minerals deal, and it was, you know, we're going to send lots of Americans in and they're going to take the minerals, and that's payback for all the weapons we've sent and the money we've given. You know, again, and we talked in another episode, me and Jules, we talked about what happened in Venezuela and what Trump did there. It's like, there's not hiding the fact that Trump's not being motivated by peace at this point. He's being motivated by what economically can he extract from Ukraine in return for, you know, his support in some way. And when that, in classic Trump fashion, when that sort of fades out and he realizes there's not a lot he's going to get, he loses interest. And I think, you know, and maybe this is a bit broader, but the fact that Europe and lots of other countries have relied on the US as sort of this policeman, this global policeman, for quite a long time. And, you know, America's obviously trying to step back from doing that now as best as they're able to. Maybe they're going to bomb Iran in the next few days. Who knows? It does make you think that, and we talked about defense spending. And I mean, for example, Germany is ramping up their defense spending substantially, which in Germany is a massive deal. You know, that's not something they're at all comfortable with or sort of used to doing. But they've seen the fact that America is not a reliable ally anymore. And at risk of sort of repeating myself, would you think that if Trump leaves the White House, or someone of his sort of political ilk, I suppose, do you reckon that will make much of a difference? Do you think it is who's in charge of the White House that could sort of change the course of where this goes? Or do you think that Russia is just generally so dead set and stubborn and not going to give up on its conditions that won't even be a factor either?
Well, yeah, I just said that I said at my conversation that Russia's objectives, I think, remain unchanged, which are the destruction of Ukraine and the destruction of Europe. So the person who succeeds Donald Trump in the White House can either choose to give support to Ukraine and to Europe and to help them in every way, and to be there to try to stop Russian aggression, or to deter Russian aggression, to deter Russia from attacking European allies, or is they can just or it can continue if it's, for example, going to be someone like J.D. Vance, the current vice president of US, who will continue Trump's policy of trying to not to give so much support to European allies. But I think no matter what happens in the US, the main thing for European countries is to be able to realize how dependent they are from the US and try to be more independent in terms of their defense, and to try to strengthen their defense forces. Because this is necessary no matter what happens in the US. European countries have to learn not to count on the US, not to continue being dependent on the US as security areas. US can remain if, for example, if American people elect someone who will be pro-European, pro-Ukrainian, then of course Europe and Ukraine and US will have good relations and will be cooperating on security and on defense. If not, then Ukraine and US will just have to learn to survive without US support.
So negotiations right now are very much in a stalemate because, as you said, Russia wants the Belarusification of Ukraine, or just the outright destruction of Ukraine as a state slash people, and Ukraine wants to integrate more with Europe and its European allies. It wants to be a member of NATO, which obviously both of which are completely unacceptable to Putin. Is there a sacrifice that the Ukrainian people are like willing to do in order to end the war? Like give up the Donbass region as the Trump administration keeps suggesting, or part with more of the minerals, that kind of thing. Is there anything that the Ukrainian people go, okay, yes, sure, that if necessary, or is it very much a case of no, no peace, no peace if we have to sacrifice the Donbass region?
Well, firstly, let me just say, when it comes to minerals deal, this was signed, but it remains on paper. It wasn't realized because the war in Ukraine continues, and US hasn't been able to start doing any work on Ukrainian minerals so far. So until the war continues, it's just this mineral still will remain on paper. When it comes to Donbas region, let me just say I prepared information what problem there is with territorial concessions and with the Donbas region. And this problem comes from the constitution of Ukraine. So the territories of Ukraine are enshrined in the constitution of Ukraine, and it's chapter 9 of the constitution, which is labeled territorial structure of Ukraine. And Article 133, it lists all the regions which are part of Ukraine. And Chapter 10 of the Constitution is labeled Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and it lists all the details regarding the status and the governance of Crimea. Ukrainian Constitution also has another chapter, Chapter 3 on elections and referendum, and includes Article 73. Article 73 of the Ukrainian Constitution says issues of altering the territory of Ukraine are resolved exclusively by an all-Ukrainian referendum. So, any peace deal in which president or anyone from the Ukrainian government or anyone which from the Ukrainian delegation which represents Ukrainian in these negotiations, they don't have any power to accept any territorial concessions. And any such deal can be just invalidated by the Constitutional Court as unconstitutional. So the key in this article is that the issues of any territorial changes must be decided by an all-Ukrainian referendum. But then the problem is how this referendum is organized. Well, firstly, not any referendum is possible while the war continues because people will not be voting under missiles and Ukrainian soldiers are on the front line. So until the war continues, not any referendum is possible. The other thing, the issue is how people who are currently under Russian occupations are going to vote. Because if it's all Ukrainian referendum, that means that people under Russian occupations also must have the right to vote. But we know that Russia already had staged fake referendums in which it illegally annexed territories and they put them in their own constitution. So it's highly unlikely that Russia will allow any vote to take place on the occupied territories. And not any referendum on these territorial concessions are possible without giving people on the occupied Russian occupations the chance to vote. But the main issue is that, as I said, if we talk about the sacrifices that Ukrainians are willing to make for peace, we must remember that Russia is an aggressor. Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukrainians are currently trying to defend themselves. And any territorial concessions, they will not bring any peace, because if we're talking about the referendum and about any territorial changes, this is not possible, and these demands are just impossible for Ukraine to agree to and to accept and to implement, because they will not bring peace. Because you see right now, because we're talking about the Donetsk region, what we know about Russia actually already started their offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk region, which is next to Donetsk region. So agreeing to if agreeing to this condition will mean that Russia can just use this territory on the Donetsk region to regroup their troops and to continue their offensive on the Dnipropetrovsk region, which Russia has already invaded and where there is already fighting taking place. So putting forward this condition and provoking this discussion about the possibility of Ukraine's withdrawal from the Donetsk region, you see, I think this is done to create tensions within the Ukrainian society, which has been suffering from war for 4 years. And these discussions, they create division between those who question Ukraine's ability to continue fighting for Donetsk region and who believes if this is Russia's condition for peace, then Ukraine must agree to it, and those who are determined that these are Ukrainian territory, they can't just be given away to Russia. Ukraine cannot agree to any Russian demands, and who understands that Ukraine's withdrawal from Donetsk region will not establish peace. And Russia has been using this disinformation, has been using their bots and trolls on social media to create division over this. And this division, they risk weakening Ukraine from within, they risk weakening the unity between Ukrainians, and this will undermine Ukraine's self-defense and will eventually can make Ukraine's capitulation inevitable. It's only, as I said, the main thing is to stop Russia fighting for Ukraine and for Europe. Give all the support for Ukraine to try to resist this Russian aggression, because as I said, the Russians' objectives remain unchanged, which is the destruction of Ukraine. And all those discussions about territorial changes, and they just, as I said, they will not bring any peace, and they are done by Russia to create a division in the Ukrainian society and in between Europeans as well, of course, who are watching and who are following the news about the war, to create this division between people of whether we should agree to this or whether we should not agree to this.
Trying to move on to, potentially, we've already sort of discussed what peace might look like. From your perspective, the immediate priority is a ceasefire, obviously. How likely do you think that, first of all, that is at the moment, and even, following the ceasefire, what kind of outcome could there be after that?
Well, what happens after the ceasefire will depend on what Ukrainians and Europeans do, because there is some division in Europe remains division between pro-Ukrainian and pro-European side, and division between pro-Russian side, and there is division between those who support the idea that Europe must continue providing aid to Ukraine, those who either want to reduce support to Ukraine, those who do not want to help Ukraine at all, and there is division between those who don't know whether but we think that Russia is not so much a threat. We think that Russia is a big threat. And also the dividing factor is the investment in defense and defense spending, which is necessary right now. But the question is how to do it without causing anger from some people who might say that investment in public services should be priority. So the question for Ukraine and for Europe is how to build the capacities to either to deter Russia from the next attack, or how they can build up their forces to prepare for next war. And you see the divisions that I've just mentioned, they are really dangerous for Europe because they risk to undermine the unity of Europe, which is also necessary right now. And there is weakening European countries from within, and the risk to create internal conflicts in Europe, and the risk leaving Ukraine without the allies and without the support which is necessary for Ukraine to resist Russian aggression. And then it means that Europe will plunge into more chaos and will be dealing with wars, either with Russia or internal conflicts. So the ceasefire, whether what happens after the ceasefire will be up to what choices Ukrainians and Europeans make, whether to remain united and strong in defense, strong in terms of their military power.
So, I mean, it's a really interesting point that you've made, and I'm curious because for me, and I think I find it very difficult to picture anybody, I mean, or even remotely to have the reasons why they wouldn't want to support Ukraine in their fight against Russia and the invasion that happened 4 years ago. But you've just mentioned, obviously, Hungary. That's I think fairly unique. I don't know if it's a sort of unique example, but you also mentioned the Czech Republic. What do you think actually drives people to move into the direction of Russia in Europe politically? So, like you mentioned, that the Czech Republic have elected a sort of pro-Russian prime minister. Like, what do you think drives people in those countries to go? I've seen what's going on down the road, not down the road, but a few countries over from me in Ukraine. I'm going to vote for a prime minister who's going to be more friendly with Moscow. Is it? They're going, I don't want that to happen here, so it's good that we have a leader who's friendly and sort of rolls over whenever Putin picks up the phone? Or is it a sort of is it something else? I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you think on that.
Well, I think the main issue that's driving to vote for people to vote for pro-Russian politicians is that these are politicians who try to who get elected on a promise that they will end all the support to Ukraine, and the justification for that is that because their country is facing their own internal problems. We see that Czech Republic, the economy in Czech Republic wasn't doing very well, and you see many people in Germany, they also refuse, they would like to see the support to Ukraine either reduced or not supporting Ukraine at all, because Germany is currently facing their own economic problems. So, of course, it's very hard for pro-Ukrainian politicians to try to persuade people who are struggling financially and that we need to support Ukraine, that sending money and missiles or weapons to Ukraine is currently necessary right now, while people in their own countries are facing these problems. And of course, some people would like to see their governments to prioritize their own well-being first, rather than sending money and weapons to another country. So this, but we see that Russian disinformation is also playing here a big role. They're just trying to exploit this. I think I wrote an article that for Kent Surrey Bylines network that how Russian disinformation will exploit all these internal problems, all in economic problems, to try to persuade people that support to Ukraine is not important right now because they want, because people in the European countries want to see the government putting their needs first. And the foreign policy, whether it's they have good relations with Russia or whether they have good relations with Europe. Well, I think maybe it's not so much of an interest for many people because they just want because they got really disappointed with the governments which they think are not putting they're not prioritizing their needs, and they see all these economic problems, and they're just voting for someone which promises to improve their lives and putting their needs first rather than sending money and weapons to another country.
And I suppose this is a bit of an unfair question to ask, but if you had a message for those people, what would you say?
I think my message is that we live in really dangerous times, and we need to understand that Russia is, as I just said, Russia's main objectives are the destruction of Ukraine and Europe, and if you want a strong country, then getting brainwashed with Russian disinformation and voting and repeating any pro-Russian narratives that we don't need to support Ukraine, we need to put our needs. We want to put the government which puts the economy of their country first. That it's. It will not help anyone because, as I said, the consequences of the defeat of Ukraine, if Ukraine is left without the allies, if without the support, then it will have dangerous and disastrous consequences on all of Europe. Yeah, that's, I think, my main message. The people need to realize that the fate of all Europe is at stake here, and of their countries first. And trying to pretend that war in Ukraine has nothing to do with them, it will not help. It will not establish peace in Ukraine, and will not establish peace in all of Europe.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for this episode, listeners. Tetiana, thank you very much for agreeing to come on here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been really, really interesting to hear your perspective. It really, really insightful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
And with that, I've been Julian in Bristol.
I've been Chris in London.
And I'm Tetiana in London.